On December 27th, Ridgefield's Planning and Zoning Commission decided the time was right to open a public dialogue about inclusionary zoning in Ridgefield. Even though it was 2 days after Christmas, approximately 23 Ridgefielders took time from their holidays to register and signed in to the public hearing at 7 p.m., expecting to be the first thing on the agenda. But much to their surprise, here's what happened.
Before we approve the agenda, I have one suggestion. I'd like to ask unanimous consent of the members present to actually reverse order of the public hearings for efficiency. I think we have a couple of things that will take a little bit more time and discussion. Application first. So we take 3.1.3 on the agenda and put that first. I'll ask for unanimous consent to reverse the order of the public hearings. Is there any opposed? All right, without any objection, we'll just reverse, and I'll proceed first to item 3.1.3.
And so the topic, with maximum public interest, is moved from first to last, and the application for a Mexican restaurant and parking regulations in the central business district jumped the queue and kept the public waiting for an hour and 13 minutes. Chairman Hendrick promises to summarize the proposed regulation in 5 to 7 minutes, but takes 28 minutes, followed by commission discussion and a staff report, delaying public input by over 2 hours from the start of the public hearings. After 46 minutes of filibuster on inclusionary zoning by the chairman, commissioners, and staff, Chairman Hendrick admonishes the public to hold their comments to 3 to 5 minutes. Since the commission is open to extending this into late January, only 5 of the 23 who registered, including Tracy O'Connor, John Tartaglia, Mary Flyn-Maguire, Richard Larson, and yours truly, Kirk Carr, raised their hands to participate. Together, they participate less than 40 minutes. The following portions of the meeting proceed for 1 hour and 35 minutes.
All right, next item, which I think was probably the one that did have a lot of interest tonight. Item 3.1.1. This is application A-22-5. I will bring up my agenda, so I'm going to get this back to screen sharing mode. So members of the public who want to follow. A-22-5 is a regulation amendment under section 2.2 and section 4.6 and section 8.8 regarding inclusionary zoning. This regulation has been initiated by the commission, and I'll open the link for those again to follow along.
Would you like me to read the public hearing while you're doing that?
While I open this up, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Oh, you do? Okay. This is a public hearing concerning the application A-22-5, a regulation text amendment for inclusionary zoning. Chair Hendrick has mentioned all of those that are present and voting. The application was formally received by the commission on November 22nd, 2022. And the legal notice reads, let me find it. Regulation text amendment per PZR 9.2.b for section 2.2, section 4.6, and section 8.8 for inclusionary zoning, which again was commission initiated. We've received 11 letters and emails. 2 have attachments, and those have been listed separately within the application itself. And that is it.
Okay, so open the public hearing at 8:16 p.m. I'll quickly summarize the correspondence, which Alice already mentioned. All of our correspondence, as a reminder for folks, is on our website. Again, if you go to Viewpoint Cloud, this is linked in our agenda, and all correspondence, emails or letters are uploaded as an electronic file here. So this is everything in our file. In quick summary, and I'm sure some members of the public may like to speak. 4 of our correspondence are essentially the same item, essentially the same message to us. In fact, 2 of them look like they were almost exactly cut and paste the same message. And the bottom line of these was asking us to continue the public hearing or postpone the public hearing to January to be past the holidays. So for clarification, for those members those people who cared a lot about that, it's a very legitimate concern. And I apologize that you didn't hear our conversations in August and October and November when we scheduled this. Our intention, I'll recap now, because people are probably now listening. Our intention was to open the public hearing today, because we have a regular meeting today. And our intention is to keep the public hearing open into January. We have meetings already scheduled, regular meetings on January 3rd and also January 17th. And we certainly anticipated that because of the holidays, it would be, and also because of the complexity of the topic, that we absolutely intend as a commission to keep the public hearing open. But we thought it was important to open the public hearing because opening the public hearing legally allows us to actually begin a dialogue. And we're kind of in that mode in August and September and October where we had a draft of this idea and we couldn't have any dialogue, couldn't take any input. So we wanted to begin the process of taking input, hearing from public, hearing from other elected officials in government, et cetera. We know that takes time. We wanted to notify people in late November, which we did. We were working on this so that they would have time to begin to respond with their thoughts. We also have scheduled this very intentionally to be in this time frame because we know that practically speaking, in the world of planning and zoning, applications tend to go a little bit quiet in December and early January, but tend to kick up and begin to accelerate quite a bit in the early spring and the late winter and so on. So actually, many people, applicants, pro, and people on all sides of this issue have asked us to make sure that we actually have clarity on this issue before the late winter, early spring, when applications tend to kick up. Because if we have this in the world of limbo in that time, it's not good for anybody. So we'd like to begin the conversation now. So this is the beginning. Again, 4 of our letters that Alice mentioned are basically that same point, to please continue. And we definitely intend to continue. And then we have a number of other letters, which I think that some of those folks are dialed in here. So I won't summarize them. I'll allow them to speak for themselves. We have letters from Mr. Richard Larson, Mr. Tim Valinsky's, Ms. Linda Lavelle, and Mr. John Tartaglia, and Mr. Kirk Carr, who I see most of those people here dialed in, so we'll speak. Just to go, since this is commission initiated, what we'll do is normally we'd hear from the applicant first. We'll do a commission presentation real quick first, and we've done this conversation in August and September and October already, so I'll try to do it quickly to spare the commissioners. But I'll make sure that I go through really quickly our kind of old presentation for members of the public who are now dialed in. And then we'll switch from there to a staff report. We'll switch from there to public comment tonight. So
Also, just a couple of the non-commission members are still live on our screen. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'm afraid to remove them because removing means getting rid of them completely.
you can actually, I can do it right here. I can change.
Can you? What option are you using?
Down and you say change role to attendee. I'm doing it right now. There you go. I think I did it. But tell me if I didn't. Okay. So
I think you did it.
if there's any other questions or comments before I get started, I'll try to do it in 5 or 7 minutes, kind of a quick run through of this presentation, which again, commissioners have gone through before. So inclusionary zoning, what is inclusionary zoning? Maybe as a first kind of primer for folks that are just tuning into this, because now we have a formal application in front of us. inclusionary zoning regulations, it's really a concept rather than a black and white simple thing. It's a concept, inclusionary zoning. They're regulations which may either require or support and or incentivize the development of affordable housing within a municipality. So you see different inclusionary zoning regulations in different towns. Sometimes there's a requirement, sometimes there's support, or you might call it promote or enable, or different. You could choose to pick words, but sometimes they're requiring, sometimes they're supporting, and sometimes they're incentivizing. Sometimes they're creating some sort of incentive for development of affordable housing within a municipality. In Connecticut, planning and zoning commissions are enabled, they're empowered to adopt inclusionary zoning regulations by a section of Connecticut General Statutes, which is 8-2I. This has been around for a while, by the way. People always talk about 8-30G, which is, I think, around 1990, 1991. And it was only, I think, a few years later, so kind of right behind that, that Connecticut also followed up with this, allowing for inclusionary zoning. It gave the power to planning and zoning commissions to either require or support or promote or encourage or incentivize the development of affordable housing within their municipality. There's two basic types of inclusionary zoning regulations, and there's of course some hybrids as well, but there's two basic types that are worth thinking about. One is mandatory inclusionary zoning, which often establish a minimum. So these would establish that all future development or all future developments that fit certain criteria, and we can talk a lot about criteria, would include an affordable component. So that's where you force affordable housing to come as part of future development. Then there's a whole category, an area of voluntary, which is generally incentive based, where typically this happens with overlay zones, although you can also do overlay zones with a mandatory requirement. But traditionally you provide in the voluntary or the incentive based side of this framework, you would provide an incentive to developers to incorporate affordable housing within their proposals. Very commonly, examples of that would be density bonuses. So a developer could ordinarily on a parcel maybe do 8 units or 10 units of housing. And if they add an affordable component, then they could build a few more units. That's the type of incentive. That's a density bonus. Sometimes under voluntary incentives, you'd have adjustments to maximum height or setback, something like that, so that a builder who wants to build on a piece of property could build just a little bit more, in terms of volume, in terms of area, if they're including an affordable component. So that's kind of inclusionary as a crash course. Ridgefield actually already has incentive-based inclusionary zoning regulations. We've had them for a while, by the way, but they're rather narrow and limited in Ridgefield. We have incentives to deliver affordable housing only in our business zones. And we also have what's called a mixed use overlay. I'll get to that. But in the B1, B2, and B3 zones in Ridgefield, business zones only, which by the way are largely along Danbury Road, Route 35, and a little bit along Route 7, US 7. In those areas, if you do more than you can actually get an additional 20% affordable housing as long as you do those units above the street level commercial. So you would develop a building in those zones, you put commercial or commercial businesses on the ground level, and you could build additional affordable housing above the street level in those zones only. And in a mixed use overlay, some people call it MU overlay zone, you can build up to 16 units, that's housing units per acre, again, over top of commercial structures, if you have 30% of those units qualifying as affordable housing under 8-30G definition, the definition of affordable housing. So we talked about this, by the way, in October, this presentation, if members of the commission remember, October 6th. And we talked about, do we want to add mandatory minimums? If yes, what criteria? And we talked about a sort of a straw man proposal, which was potentially, we'd say something like, to keep it very simple, for any new development that's more than 4 dwelling units, we'd have a minimum of something like 15 to 20% affordable, and potentially offer incentives if the developer was willing to do 20 or 25% affordable. By the way, the idea here is obviously at 30% affordable, the developer has the option of, or not the option, if they're doing 30% affordable, they have the protection, I should say, of 8-30G. So when they come in front of us, if a developer is proposing a project that has 30% affordable units, then if we deny that application, the developer has an automatic right to appeal that's fast-tracked in Superior Court into a special session, and the Planning and Zoning Commission is essentially on the defense automatically. The Planning and Zoning Commission has to demonstrate on its record why it denied the application, and basically the only valid reasons for denial in that case the courts have upheld are health, safety, welfare, or other matters which they can legally consider. There's kind of this fourth vague area, but the commission has to establish the bona fide reason for rejecting the application on an 8-30G. So that gives the applicant of an 8-30G project 30% affordable quite a lot of power, as many people have heard who follow this issue. It's many people consider it kind of a slam dunk. Then if you come in with 30% affordable, because the commission's kind of so challenged on an appeal, it makes it very, very difficult for the commission to negotiate or to work to make sure that the application is the best it can be for Ridgefield. When it's at that 30% level, the commission has a lot less power. So our goal with an inclusionary zoning regulation is to give developers and the commission, by the way, to give the developers and the commission a zone where we can have affordable housing incorporated that still complies with our regulations and doesn't flout our regulations and doesn't go down this easy appeal route. So we've proposed, and I should say before I get into that, we looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We looked at 7 different neighboring towns. Or I'm sorry, 6 because I counted Ridgefield. We looked at Darien, New Canaan, Reading, Greenwich, Westport, and Wilton as comparables. We also looked a little bit lighter at municipalities outside of the immediate area, but we looked at those neighboring communities at their inclusionary zoning regulations. And by the way, most of them have an IZ regulation, with the exception of Wilton, doesn't have any. Most of them do have some form of IZ regulation, sometimes mandatory minimums, sometimes incentive-based. Some of them are targeted in certain areas, which is, by the way, not an uncommon thing. It's not that it's preponderant everywhere, but I'd say, anecdotally, I'd say it's half of all IZ regulations out there are targeted. So Planning and Zoning Commission says, we want to see affordable housing in this section of our community. So they actually do an overlay zone where they target it into a specific area. And so some of them have overlay zones where they're targeted, they're affordable in certain areas. Some of them have more broad. We want to see affordable peppered naturally, sprinkled naturally through the community. And so there's examples of that. We looked at all examples, and we felt in our discussions in the fall amongst the commission that a simple regulation that applied to all projects everywhere, that established a mandatory minimum, was the right thing for Ridgefield, easy to understand. It would put affordable housing wherever new future projects may come up. That's a mandatory minimum, and then there would be a incentive level, which we have already, again, but our incentive program right now is only in very targeted areas, in a very specific cases where you have, where you want to build residential above commercial. So we decided as a commission that we would propose something for discussion tonight that that would be more simple, and it's I'll move now over to the actual proposal. I'm getting a spinning wheel of death. I should have opened it. Oops, there it is. Okay, so we have our regulation is kind of relatively simple, really. Basic requirement. All applications for development which result in the creation of 4 or more dwelling units shall designate a minimum of 15% of the total number of dwelling units in a manner such that the units would qualify to be counted as either assisted housing or set aside development as defined in section 8-30G of the Connecticut General Statutes. And in calculating the minimum requirement, fractions should be rounded to the nearest whole number. That means up or down, by the way. We had a conversation back in October or whatnot about, do we, in some cases, some communities always round up. So, 2.3 would be 3 because you're always rounding up. If you're rounding to the nearest whole number in the traditional rounding way, then 2.3 becomes 2 because you're rounding down. So that's our proposed draft. Phasing was an important conversation in certain statutes that we looked at, or regulations that we looked at. There was the question about could you build, 3 or 10 units and then have the affordable be a year or 2 later. What we're saying here is that for any phased project where there's multiple buildings are structured, the affordable units should be constructed within the first phase, unless the commission specifically permits otherwise in the application approval. So the commission can listen to the application, and for some reason it might make sense to deliver the affordable units later, but the default in the conversation should be the affordable as part of the original phase when you have a phased project. Integrated site, this section, pretty straightforward again, is unless permitted by the commission within the application approval, all projects shall be designed to mix affordable units evenly throughout the site so that you don't have, a site with 40 units and there's 10 in one building that are basically the affordable units, and then there's 30 units, townhomes or something that are separated. So we want them more sprinkled again in, because that's part of kind of what we discussed about. And the affordable units should share the same common amenities and services available to traditional units. So no differentiation in terms of parking or common room access. And generally the affordable units shouldn't be physically identified or otherwise distinguishable. So you don't put a sign on that says affordable units to the right, et cetera. So that's the basic requirement. I'll quickly go through again the incentives and then the fee in lieu. I'll skip the administration because it's pretty detailed, and I don't think it's probably what we're going to get into tonight. So there's an incentive level. Developments which are subject to the provisions of this section, which exceed the basic requirement defined above by a further 5%. So up here we say you must have a minimum of 15% affordable in your project. Here we're saying if you want to exceed that by another 5%, that is 20%, then they may be eligible. May is important, not shall. We're not definitely giving it. The commission has the option, may be eligible for the below incentives at the sole and absolute discretion of the commission. So this gives the commission quite a bit of power in the conversation to grant potentially a density bonus of an additional 30% of the dwelling units. So somebody that might ordinarily be able to do 9 units on a piece of property could do potentially up to 12 at the commission's discretion if they were willing to do 20% at affordable housing. Commission can 30% density bonus, sorry, and the density bonus may be a combination of affordable units and traditional units, so they don't all have to be affordable units. It's just a clarification. Dimension and bulk. Commission may grant a waiver to the dimensional standards established in these regulations, including lot area, lot coverage, setback, yard, floor area, things like that, provided the waiver does not deviate from the original regulation by more than 25%. This language right here was taken almost exactly from the Darien version of their regulation. Their regulation has this this kind of ability, and it allows the commission, again, allows the commission to essentially negotiate and to provide some waivers from ordinary regulations in the case where there's a good affordable component, so that the applicant isn't tempted to go to the 830G level just to get a small waiver. We would rather see them come in under our regulations, and where we have the power to and the discretion to give those kind of waivers. Same thing with the parking. The commission may reduce the parking requirements by up to 25%. Again, if they're doing more than 20% affordable housing. And the kind of classic place that this might make sense is on an age-restricted affordable housing project, where the commission hears from the applicant that should be less of a requirement for parking and an age-restricted affordable unit. So the commission could listen to that and make the determination that a waiver of the normal parking requirement is appropriate in this case as an incentive. So last thing I'll go through, and then I'll stop for commission discussion. Oh, I have actually one chart to show you. It's fee in lieu, and this is the one area where we said you could just stop, by the way, and not have this fee in lieu section. Just prove it as is. But we decided to also include for discussion this fee in lieu section, because of course there's always some people that say, well, there's applications that are going to come forward, and for whatever reason, it's just not appropriate for them to deliver affordable housing. And an example of that might be somebody who wants to do 5 single-family homes or 7 single-family homes somewhere that are large estate homes, et cetera. And they say, well, ordinarily they'd be caught up in needing to do 1 or 2 affordable units in that project. And so again, following the Darien model, I'll say this was taken a bit from Darien, but others also have similar provisions. You can say, okay, if you can't or don't want to, you really don't think it's appropriate to put affordable housing in this project, instead of doing affordable housing, the commission can waive the affordable units for a payment of a fee, and that fee goes into essentially either a trust fund. If now one doesn't exist in Ridgefield right now, we don't have a trust fund, but if one existed, you could put it into a trust fund to build affordable housing. Or if the trust fund doesn't exist, then it could go into some other restricted fund that would be designated for use specifically to advance affordable housing in the community. Don't expect a lot of take up for this. Again, remember, it's in the drafting of this language here that we have, it is actually when this section would apply to development intended exclusively for single family dwelling units. So we're not even contemplating the idea that people could buy out in a multifamily like apartment building or condo townhome building. But when there's an exclusively single family project where it really might not make economic sense or otherwise, it's not practical to imagine an affordable unit, then in that limited case, then those people don't get a full free pass out of the regulation. They are actually required to contribute to the affordable housing goals of Ridgefield. They just contribute financially. The last thing I'll share before I open it up for general conversation is it's important to note, since we did this draft, and actually, by the way, I meant to share this on our last discussion, but we just ran out of time. So I wanted to make sure I bring it up here. This is a chart which actually shows what the actual number of units that would be required. On the left side here is the number of units in a potential project: 3 units, 4 units, 5, all the way up to 30, whether we skip then 50 and 100 just to show. And at the 15% level, this is the exact calculation of the number of affordable units. If you say 15% of those units should be affordable. And if you're rounding, not rounding up, this is the number. And if you say round up, this is the number. So you see where the highlights, by the way, are where it's different. You can see at 7 units, 15% is 1.05, which gets rounded to 1, or if you round up, it's 2. And at the 20% level and the 25% level. I'll leave this on. I won't go through every line, but I'll leave it on. I think this probably should be an important part of the discussion, because what you'll see, I'll summarize. I think below the level of about 10 units, 10 or 11 units, the numbers are pretty tight, where the difference between 15% rounded is 1 and 20% rounded is 1. So I think we may want to think about, on projects of a smaller scale, making this 1 and actually 2 instead of 15 and 20%. We may want to actually have a chart that says 1 and 2, or 1 and 2, so that instead of worrying about the rounding math, we just specify the number. I'll leave this up for a moment unless somebody wants to redirect our attention, but I'll stop talking, and I'll open up for any commission comment, and then again we'll go to staff, and then we'll go to members of the public. Any commissioners want to?
I'm interested in hearing from the public.
I have a question on getting feedback from other groups. Is that something we can request?
Yeah, so we've formally done a referral to the Board of Selectmen, because obviously there's a big policy decision. The response from the Board of Selectmen, I actually should have mentioned in the beginning, the Board of Selectmen was like a bunch of our letters saying, basically just thought the conversation should keep going, into January because of the holidays, which I already spoke with First Selectman Marconi. Actually, even when we sent the referral, I said, I think we'll definitely extend it into January. So that's a no-brainer. That was their only comment, is keep the conversation open through January. We haven't heard anything else substantially from them yet, in terms of comments about the actual proposal. I also, I know that the members of the Affordable Housing Committee have seen the proposal, and I think some of them are even here. At least they told us that they would join.
Because I definitely would want to hear from them, because in reading about inclusionary zones, a lot of the conversation and research talks about an inclusionary zone is one component, but there are other components that need to happen as well. Inclusionary zoning alone is not going to create tons and tons of affordable housing. It's several different policies or programs enacted. So I'm interested, now that the affordable housing plan submitted, where the affordable housing, what is being prioritized and what's moving forward, to see how this will work in conjunction with other programs that are being implemented in town.
That's a really good point. I think I hope we definitely hear from them. I'm looking at the attendees, and I know that at least 2 members of the Affordable Housing Committee said that they would probably join, but I don't see them. But we'll follow up with them if they don't talk tonight. Make sure they come back. But Mariah, to address your fundamental point, I think that is actually a really, really important one, that this is just part of a larger solution or strategy, or whatever you want to call it. We talked about this again, just to refresh some members of the public might be new to this. We initiated this conversation in August, not entirely, but in part because the affordable housing plan was nearing completion, and inclusionary zoning is one of the 18 or whatever, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but the different strategies that were recommended in that plan. Inclusionary zoning was one of the many strategies that they did, that are now in our formal plan. I personally think, from my listening of everything related to the plan, that the inclusionary zoning was one of the less controversial elements of that plan. A lot of the things that people worked up about that plan were on specific projects and specific sites. This is not that.
I feel like it's important to not like operate in isolation. So I think I'm happy, like, thank you very much for initiating the affordable housing conversations. And I think it would be important to have someone speak on behalf of the Affordable Housing Commission so we can look at this holistically with what the town overall is planning over the next 1 to 5 years for affordable housing. And one other referral I thought would be useful. I think if we're going to be passing a regulation that includes reference to an affordable housing trust or a fee in lieu that's going to go to a commission focused on affordable housing, that we should actually have a plan for that. And so I'm wondering, should we refer that, if that's the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance, but having someone speak to, should we set up an affordable housing trust? I'd rather before we decide to pass something, to have all the tools and components implemented so that when we do pass it, it's ready to actually function fully.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I agree. And if, a lot of the affordable housing plan is all, it's not as if there are specific things in the works. It's an open plan of suggested directions, and yes, you can review the whole plan, and this is a great part of that whole plan. And any of us can read the whole plan at any moment at this time. I guess we could read it here or whatever, but like we could each just go read it. Or if you'd been to any of the meetings, you know what's going on, but there's no specific thing that's happening right now. It's more like there are all these avenues that are great possibilities to increase affordability. And this one is a really good one. It's one of many, yes.
One of a part of my issue along the whole affordable housing plan journey is that we did have so many great options in the plan, but we need to actually do something. Like we created this plan. What's the plan for actual implementation? And what are the next, I'm interested in what are the next steps now that the plan has been, what's being prioritized and things like that. So interested from hearing from the Affordable Housing Committee to hear what are, of the 15 different options, what are the next ones moving forward to see how this fits into that picture.
Yeah, I don't know if that any one specific one is moving forward. I think that it's just a list of great possibilities, and here's one on our plate right now that we could help move forward as a next step. So, but yeah,
The affordable housing plan, as I read it, is a little bit like our plan of conservation and development, where it's a document that provides a vision for the overall community. And it actually has a lot of different ideas, and some of those ideas actually have essentially assignments, to relevant entities within the town government that kind of need to act on the specific idea. So like in our plan of conservation and development, all those pages, if you look into it, you see like certain things should be acted on by, the Affordable Housing Committee, or should be acted on by the Parking Authority, or should be acted on by census. In the Affordable Housing Plan, there are a number of those ideas that should be acted on by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So this is one of the ideas where actually in the plan, our action is basically expected. Like, the idea was the plan says we should look into inclusionary zoning here.
right. So this is the next step.
Yeah.
Like for
Us looking into inclusionary zoning, and we don't have to approve it, but the plan says we should look into it. Here we are looking into it now. We are doing the next step. But your point's still pretty valid, Mariah, that I think we need to hear, I totally agree, and we need to hear from members of the Affordable Housing Committee. Again, Dave in particular, or I know Laurie Mazzola also is hopeful to be able to speak. I don't see either of their names in the audience, but we'll go around and
I feel like, I feel like we shouldn't hold this up in waiting for that, I guess, because it is part of the plan.
Yeah.
But sure, I'd be happy to hear from any of them.
we're likely, again, as I said in the beginning, I think this is complicated enough and we're going to have enough input that I think without it, I can't command it. You all have to agree, but I think it seems logical that we will continue this till January 3rd and potentially
Yeah.
the 7th beyond. We don't have a time limit because the commission initiated. We have the ability to grant ourselves extensions. So I think we're starting the conversation now. We're going to start taking input. We should encourage the Affordable Housing Committee members and by the way, also Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance to come in future meetings and provide some input.
I definitely think we should hear from the Affordable Housing Committee before we voted on this. I feel like this is something that they've researched. They would know and have an opinion on this. And this is I think a relatively significant zoning change that having the opinions of the Board of Selectmen, Affordable Housing and Board of Finance are important to have before we vote.
All right. Anyone else? No, I think that points. I don't
Can I
hear.
ask-
I don't
can
hear
I-
any objection to that point.
Can I ask a question, Rob? Just looking at the point that you made about rounding up or down. So as we consider, if we would consider that, how does 8-30G at 30%? How do they do their calculations? Do they round up or down or both? What does 8-30G do? Because I think it would be important to know as we decide what we would want to do if we want to do that, where we don't get ourselves into a position where it just becomes, they just go, oh, well, let's just do 8-30G because it's about the same.
Sue, you hit the nail on the head. I think that's what we want to be really important. We want to be careful that our mandatory minimum or our incentive level is not so close to in actual numbers, forget about the percentage, but in actual
Yeah.
numbers, where developers just go to 830G. Like the whole point here is to give them a reason not to go to 830.
Right.
To answer your question, you're actually catching me off guard. I can't remember what I think they round, not round up, but Alice,
Yeah.
if somebody wants to catch,
Right, they do.
they round in the traditional way. So, below 2.5, if it's 2.4, it would go to 2 units. And
So they round both up and down then.
they just round in the traditional way. But yeah, on the really small, on the smaller projects below 10 units in total building, then that requirement for 1 affordable unit or 2 affordable units. And if you think about it, 9 affordable units, 30%, that's 3 right away. So if you're going to build 9, units, and you say, well, if I do 3 of them, that becomes an 8-30G project. So we want to make sure.
I like your suggestion of a chart, Rob. I think it makes it much clearer too.
Instead of the percentage, you might say the percentage above a certain number.
Yeah, up to a certain level or something, but I like the chart initially. I think that makes it really clear.
And by the way, the chart wouldn't be anything like this. I put all these numbers here so that we can discuss. The chart would probably just be like 2 columns at the end. That's number of units required. Any other conversation before we have staff and public comment?
I was wondering if there was would it be worthwhile to go back to any of the other municipalities? I know we've touched about this before, Rob, because you had done the initial outreach to discuss how their feedback on their laws. Is there anything, have they had a lot of success, not success? A lot of the research done about inclusionary zoning focuses on cities. So I'd be interested to hear more about how it works in suburbia versus cities, which I think there's more potential for it in suburbia versus cities.
If you all want, me or Alice and I to formally invite anybody to come in, I'd be happy to do that. And, we could do that in an upcoming meeting. Alice has a little bit, I know, in her staff report of input from others. And I can tell you, having made some phone calls in the fall to my peers in other towns, this is my summary, basically. The tricky thing is every town has its own kind of weird differences on regulations, and then they have their own historical opinion and experience on those regulations. So some of them are really negative about their experience with inclusionary zoning, but those ones, some of them they had no mandatory minimum, they had only an incentive, and then they only had an incentive on certain parts of their town. Like, as an example, Westport only has their inclusionary zoning applies to Post Road only, right? That it doesn't apply anywhere else. And I'm not criticizing that. I'm just, they made a policy decision that that's where they wanted to see affordable. So then if we ask them about their experience with the affordable housing, well, unless we're thinking about doing something similar, then we're not really getting, we're not going to.
It does seem like a lot, like even the research nationally is a lot, like it's hard because every program is so different that it's hard to do an apples to apples comparison of them.
So I mean, I know Alice will talk about it a little bit in the staff report, but and I'm not pushing back. If you want to bring people in, I'm happy to invite people. I just think that at the end of the day, we really, personally, I feel like you have to think about what's right for Ridgefield and really try to envision what we feel will work for Ridgefield. And some of our earlier conversations were around keeping it simple and making sure it applies everywhere to all projects and that we're not targeting or pinpointing certain sites. So we've kind of drafted this, we've done a draft that feels right for Ridgefield based on the commission conversation.
To the public,
To staff first, John.
to the staff, then the public.
Alice.
Okay, my first report was before we had actually drawn up any applications, so a lot of that is irrelevant. I recently sent an update today, actually, that just has some quotes from the Connecticut Planners Listserv going over some of the towns. For instance, I mentioned that Greenwich is reconsidering their wording. And there's some other towns that made a few comments that you can read in my latest report. Because as Rob said, it is complicated and everybody handles it quite differently. And that's about my only comment on it at this point.
Okay. Oh, one thing I'll add, because Alice, you probably just, I know you're thinking about it in the back of your head, but we also have Tom Beecher has had this in his inbox to review. He's been pretty busy over the so with a few things for Ridgefield, but also a few things for other towns. I know he's looked at it. I know he understands it and doesn't have any major objection. He may have some wordsmithing, like he did with the parking. I imagine he may have some minor edits. I'll make sure that we get that by the next meeting.
Okay, I haven't heard anything from him about that one.
All right. If there's no questions for staff, then we'll go to the public. Members of the public who are interested in testifying as part of this hearing. I see two hands already. If anybody else would like to speak, I'd ask you now or as soon as you can to actually click the button to raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and keep your hand up if you don't mind, because what it does is that creates a virtual line for us to manage, and we'll make sure we call people in the order that you come about. We'll make sure we get to all the hands that are raised. If we don't see your hand raised, we'll know that you want to talk. So Alice, I think Tracy O'Connor's first on my list. Do you want to promote her?
Yeah, I just promoted her. Should show up in a second.
Or just ask members of the public, as we ordinarily do for public hearings, try to be cognizant, limit your time. We usually ask it to keep it to about 3 minutes or so. If you want to speak more than once, you'll have that opportunity. If you want to make a point, and then we can have some discussion, you can always come back.
Oh, she didn't. Let me try again. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
I miss it.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Tracy O'Connor. I live at 59 Prospect Street. And I have a question about, two questions, but this one, you're talking about inclusionary zoning. Is there a reason that it doesn't include ADA accessible in any of these? Is that part of the inclusionary piece or not? Like, shouldn't units have one ADA accessible or elderly accessible?
Good question. I want to make sure I get pulled to the right language just so that we answer the
I
question.
believe it's a building requirement, is it not?
That's
Yeah,
what I
it's
was-
already a
number.
building requirement.
Yeah, that's why I want to kind of structure our answer in a couple of steps, actually, just to be really thorough. So ADA, in terms of accessibility requirements, there are ADA code requirements, as Mr. Salvo and Ms. Stu are both talking about. There's building code requirements that, ensure accessibility. In addition to that, the 8-30G statute, Alice, you can help me along the way as I kind of ad lib. I'm trying to get the right term, but we have both set aside development and assisted housing are the two types of 8-30G, and I believe assisted housing includes certain types of, there's certainly housing for, I'm blanking on the term, but there are certain types of essentially public housing that's included in that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
Well, that was my question. Shouldn't high density or housing include those members of the public as well as affordable? That was my question. Aren't they as important?
And it does, it's simply, it is already covered by building code requirements for a certain level of multifamily housing. So that's already given by code. So this is sort of another overlay.
Thank
Another way to answer your question, and I think we owe you some clarity about, by the way, the term is assisted housing or set aside development. So under the Connecticut statutes, the actual defined terms are assisted housing, one type of housing, and set aside development. Those are the two types of developments that qualify basically for 8-30G appeals. And those are the same types of housing that we are requiring or incentivizing in our regulations. So we're essentially mirroring the 8-30G definitions. Another answer that Ms. O'Connor to mention is that I'm not sure, we can talk to legal counsel to say, I'm not sure that we're actually allowed, I'm not sure we're enabled. There's an enabling statute that allows us to do this in inclusionary zoning regulation. We get our power from the state. Our Planning and Zoning Commission is basically. So, and in our enabling legislation, 8-2I in this case, the enabling legislation is for affordable housing. So I'm not sure that we could actually separately pinpoint or target like handicap accessibility or other sorts of disabled accessibility. We might be able to. It's worth looking into, but I'm just not sure.
Okay, thank you. I just had another quick question. Why isn't the audio session of your December 20th meeting available to the public?
You had asked me about that, and I had emailed you that Kelly Ryan is the one who put that up, so I will talk to her tomorrow and get that to you.
Okay, so it's
There
not.
must be a problem with the link. I didn't try to go to the link. I just sent you the
Yeah,
location of the
I
link.
appreciate that. It's I just wondered if it came under the ZBA purview or the P&Z purview. I was trying.
Yes, it is under the ZBA as far as the location of the link. So I will have Kelly make sure that's working, and I will email you tomorrow.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And so do my neighbors in Wisteria Gardens. Thank you very much. And thank you all for everything you do.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor.
Okay.
Okay, the next is Mr. Tartaglia. I will promote him.
Yes, sir. You able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Tartaglia. Go ahead.
I just briefly I'm sure you read the two letters and the number of letters. I'm not, by appearing here, waiving any constitutional, state or federal rights, nor am I waiving the rights that we discussed about, or I discussed about the limits of the statutory power. And nothing in this presentation or appearance should be considered as a waiver. Briefly, to the points of order, your public notice refers generally to a text. You've referred to tonight as this is a conversation, this is a rough draft. I think the item under the filing is called a rough draft. I'm not understanding exactly what your public hearing is encompassing. Are you saying in your public notice that what you're noticing for this meeting is, well, we're thinking of discussing a draft, and although I, Mr. Hendrick, have drafted a mandatory regulation, we're not thinking about that. We're just thinking about the concept. Precisely what was your public notice on? And are you notifying the public that it is, let's assume that your third draft is legal, it is your third draft that your commission is considering as the draft that the public is bound by? That is, that's all that's going to be discussed in the meeting. Or is this just a general discussion, which means you're going to have another meeting and another public notice before you pass it into law?
If that's the end of the question, simple answer is that our notice is inclusive of the entire file, which is on Viewpoint Cloud. It's actually referenced on the public notice. And yes, the third draft of the regulation itself, which I've just gone through and presented in the meeting, that is the draft which we're proposing. Since this is a friendly amendment, it's commission initiated, we could certainly discuss changes and edits to that draft. And we expect, frankly, Mr. Tartaglia, over a couple of meetings to make some minor changes. We had been discussing it, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, we've been discussing this in some drafts. And
I'm sorry, your audio is going out. I'm not able to hear you. You're breaking up.
we have been discussing this a couple of times and drafted a couple of times. We got to a point in a draft where we felt that the draft was near finished, in our opinion, or definitely getting close. And it was time for wider input. So we're taking wider input on the third draft.
So I object to your public notice because you don't have a definite draft. You don't have specific language. And if you're going to vary the language or do something different, a proper notice has to be given. Specificity, I do not want to waive your evidentiary burden of proof. I assume your commission's burden of proof to present evidence that your proposed changes proper or appropriate for the town. You keep, and all of the members of this commission seem to be saying, well, we're doing what's good for Ridgefield. I haven't heard one item of evidence, one evidentiary submission, one economic analysis, one actual factual discussion about this town, its needs, its specific parcels that you intend to be speaking of, or anything else of specificity sufficient for me to respond, except to indicate that I think you're generally going in the wrong direction with essentially mandating the control of a means of production, which is everybody in Ridgefield's essential wealth, except for perhaps 30 people, is maybe 50, is essentially real estate, what they own, their homes or related. I think that you're taking control and mandating a means of production. I'm not at all understanding how you're doing that in the residential zones, A, AA, or AAA. I'm not understanding how your proposed zone somehow extends to every zone in the town, especially the majority, I guess it's about 60, 70%, maybe more, that are single family residential. And if they're not affected by your regulation, I'm not at all satisfied in any presentation that You've not included that in your mandate. And quite frankly, your mandate seems to be creating or limiting property rights of people. And I'm not understanding how you're having the power to do that, especially in light of a fee that, as near as I calculated, was about $425,000 per unit. I'm not quite understanding it. Perhaps I didn't understand your wording. I did provide detailed commentary on it. I did provide specific questions. You don't seem to have addressed any of them, and it's your prerogative. But I submit by your lack of specificity, Mr. Hendrick, and your, in my opinion, not a really thorough or fair presentation of what you're intending to do. I think you've deceived the public, and I think you haven't properly set forth precisely what the level of control you're proposing within a planning and zoning commission, an elected body, but a body that is not paid by the town. You volunteer, which bespeaks the fact that you're not really the people that really are answerable to the public. You're simply volunteers in a limited role commission, and you're undertaking to do something so major. I think it's beyond your power, and quite frankly, I don't think you've thought it out well, and I ask you very strongly to really reconsider the mandatory aspect of that and shut away from it. I think it's a mistake. I understand you may have all good intentions, but as
More
I
than 10
stated,
minutes, Mr. Chairman.
yeah, you know what, Mr. Katz, one final quote and I'll be finished, all right? You just give me one moment. I think that you're down the wrong path and you don't have the power that you think you have. And I think you're exercising it without restraint and improperly. There are many other things to be said. I said them in the letters, and I will, if you'll let me, at the end of this, I'm going to get a little more technical in the reasons why this presentation is woefully lacking. But at the moment, my biggest objection is you don't have the power to change the property rights of the people of the town. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Your points are all heard very clearly. I appreciate them. Is there any further discussion or questions for Mr. Tartaglia before we move on? Okay. Who's next up? Alice. The only thing I would note, I'm sorry to keep, I want to make it a lot of tit for tat, but just to be very clear, because it was Mr. Tartaglia's main point, which you repeated several times, is whether or not the Planning and Zoning Commission has the power. The Planning and Zoning Commission is specifically enabled, specifically empowered to do exactly what we're doing here under Section 8-2I of the Connecticut General Statutes.
In fact, we're mandated to do it
Yeah,
by the state.
that's actually I was getting to that next. We're allowed, permitted, enabled, empowered, whatever word you want to use. We're empowered to enact inclusionary zoning regulations by 8-2I. We are separately, as Mr. Katz is about to say, we separately have a state mandate, whether or not we like it as a town, whether or not any individual likes it. We have a mandate to progress, to make progress in the direction of affordable housing, of increasing affordable housing in our community. We are mandated to do that under several other sections of the Connecticut General Statutes, including 8-30J, not G. J is the section that actually requires us to have an affordable housing plan, which I know we've had a lot of conversation as a community over the last year about that, creating the plan. And 8-30G, which is the one that's most famous, actually essentially makes it so that if we don't keep up with that mandate, that then developers have the ability to, as many people say, do virtually what they want in terms of development in the community. If we don't move forward with on the affordable housing spectrum. So there's both empowerment and mandate all over the place on this requirement. And I don't think there's any doubt, frankly. I'd be happy to hear from commissioners if they disagree with me, but I don't think there's any doubt that we are empowered. And again, in fact, arguably, we are mandated on this subject.
We need to move forward with public comment.
Okay, next up, Mr. Carr, I think on my list.
I was told to unmute. Can you hear me? This is Mary Flyn-Maguire.
There you are. Go ahead, Ms. McGuire.
I am, okay, thank you. I didn't want to interfere there. As the gentleman before me noted, you are volunteers, and I have to tell you, I appreciate the work you're doing. Very few people appreciate what volunteers do. That does not mean I necessarily agree with you, but I do really appreciate your work. I've been in town since 1987, raised our family here. And the point of my email, and Alice, I want to thank you for being helpful in explaining the steps of how to get to where we are tonight. When you mentioned, Mr. Hendrick, that you've been discussing this since September, October, November, I don't know how I would have known that. And that could be my lack of knowledge. I do not hang out on the town website. I don't recall getting anything in the mail or a postcard saying this is an issue important and you should follow the thing, whatever. So I honestly don't know how the public, like me, should have been informed. So the point of my email to you all, first point, was that this discussion be held later, away from the holiday season, away from Christmas, away from Hanukkah, away from families not even being here in town. So unfortunately, we were the third topic to be discussed, and you gave a very good explanation and background, Mr. Hendrick, because I truly knew very little about this. But that was about an hour and 20 minutes ago. So if this were to go the way I had intended, this was not going to be continued, but what you so eloquently discussed or informed us would have occurred at the next meeting, so everybody could be hearing it. So I'd hate to say to you, please repeat it. But if I had not heard that tonight, I would be, not have the knowledge I now have. So that was one thing. I was not requesting that this be continued. I was requesting that it be moved to a convenient date in January, February, whenever. The other was that it not be in Zoom. This is just so impersonal. You can't even see me. I can see you all. And of course, if we got a really good turnout, because if everybody really knew what was being discussed, I have a feeling you'd have more than 23 public members or whatever I saw up there before. So Zoom, and I do Zoom for many meetings, but Zoom for this very important meeting to me is not really appropriate. And then my very last point that I had mentioned was, please make sure you do not vote tonight. And it seems that you're not, and I appreciate you hearing that. But I strongly feel it needs to be later. It needs to be in a public forum, face to face, and let us continue the discussion. So maybe I could ask just one question and then I will be done. How would I have known about all of this if I wasn't, quote unquote, hanging out on the town website?
You wouldn't, Ms. Flynn, and actually that's, I know you have a different viewpoint on it, but we had some discussion about this when we scheduled it, and we believe that it was important to begin the public hearing specifically so that we could make this notice so that people could start to pay attention, because otherwise we'd have to wait and do public notice.
Okay.
Holidays, and public notice, by the way, has to be done several weeks before the actual hearing. So we did public notice a number of weeks ago. So it's quite a long process, and we decided it was better to put the community on alert early and have the conversation, which definitely will last more than one meeting. But we thought it was better to start early rather than to continue and delay and push the can down the road and not have the conversations. We elected to put the
Sure. No, I appreciate that. But how would I know? How would I know about the public notice? Do I have to subscribe to the Ridgefield Press in order to know about public notice? Or do emails, and I sincerely mean that, do emails go out from Rudy Marconi stating that these are the public notices?
Good, it's actually a really good point, and one that we have discussed also in our commission. By the way, it would be another regulation amendment similar to this, where we have discussed the fact that right now our regulations are written so that public notice is in the newspaper of record, which is the Ridgefield Press, and there's definitely some conversation amongst the public, but also the commissioners, that we should allow for other means of valid public notice, legal valid public notice, but there are some legal requirements that we have from the state. We'd have to update our regulations, but we'd love to have more.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I can assure you, I would have been talking to you in September and October if I had been aware of this. So thank you very much. I look forward to the next meeting, which I hope is not January 3rd. Let's give us a little time to breathe from the holidays.
Unfortunately, because of our schedule, it will be January 3rd, but we also have a meeting on the 17th. These are our regular meetings that are scheduled, for the year.
Sure, but inclusionary zoning then will definitely be on the 3rd, or shall it be scheduled on the 17th with enough notice given so people know about it?
It can be across both. So the way planning and zoning works is once you open a public hearing, now actually we can receive, mail correspondence. We can discuss it at any meeting now once it's open. So it's open today, then we can discuss it on the 3rd. We could also discuss it on the 17th. We could also schedule a special meeting on a different date. Although, by the way, some people don't like special meetings because they're on dates that conflict with other town meetings. So we can, now that the public hearing is open, we're allowed under the law to have a lot of different dialogue at different dates over the next several weeks or beyond. The public hearing is open then until it's finally closed. And unfortunately, we're not allowed to take input until the public hearing is open. So opening it tonight was an important step to allow now to begin to hear from.
Okay, so you're gonna have to give your spiel again at the beginning of the next 2 meetings. Unfortunately for you.
You're a different voice, but you're right. I think that it would be good, we'll need a little summary again at each one. I recognize that.
Thank you.
Okay, next person is Kurt Carr.
By the way, Mr. Carr, or any members of the public who want to talk, I think you should be able to go on video if you want to. You just need to click the button on. I think Mr. Carr knows that because he's been around.
Say that again?
You should be able to use your video, right? If you would like.
Yes, let's see. I think I do that here.
But I just done it.
There we go. Okay. Hi. I would like to ditto what Ms. Flyn-Maguire said, and I hope you do have a public face-to-face meeting on the 17th of January. I'm really not sure what problem you're trying to solve except this 830G mandate, as has been mentioned earlier. If there was no 830G, what problem would you be solving? There is no problem to solve. Ridgefield has about 9,000 households. 2% of our population is in poverty. If you took that 2% and you applied it, that's about 180 households in poverty. If you gross it up 50% to 3%, that would be 270 households. We have 284 low-income restricted units in Ridgefield already. There is not an addressable market for low-income housing that isn't already addressed either. And this is the other thing, that's only counting income restricted housing. We don't know how much naturally occurring affordable housing there is. And the problem with 830G is no matter how low the rent is on a property, whether it's a accessory dwelling unit or it's an apartment, unless it's income restricted, it's not affordable by definition. And so you're rushing down this path to create a lot more inclusionary or low-income restricted housing. And I listened to your presentation last time, and this is modeled after Darien. Darien and Ridgefield are two very different towns. Darien is, in the last 10 years, has grown twice as fast as Ridgefield. It's projected to grow another 10% over the next 20 years, while Ridgefield is projected to actually decline in population. So the needs are very, very different. I don't know whether any of you looked at the video that I sent in that had a tour of the inclusionary zoning in Darien, but it should scare you. I know that I think the people in Darien have been very surprised about how that has materialized. And I don't think there's anybody on the Planning and Zoning Commission who would want to see that kind of development in Ridgefield. Their planning and zoning, their inclusionary zoning, as I understand it, is an overlay zone. What you have planned is in all zones in Ridgefield. I think there are places in Ridgefield that you might want to experiment. You already have, and I heard Mr. Katz say that he thought that the incentives were an abysmal failure. So why don't we try the mandates in just those areas and see if that's any better? And why do you think those are abysmal failures? You think the developers are just cheap? No, the reason is there's not an addressable market for low-income restricted housing that isn't already addressed. They could build a lot of inclusionary housing and, you know, gross up the cost of the rent on the market rate units and still make a profit, except for one thing. They couldn't fill the low-income inclusionary units, or they'd have great difficulty doing it. And what they fill it with, if they were able to fill it, could be very problematic for a variety of reasons. So if I were you, I would proceed with great caution. You're not trying to be insulting in any way, but you're a fairly green commission. 4 of you have been on the commission for a year. Your chairman has been a chairman for a year. Rushing off to do something this sweeping, this early in your terms, is just not necessary. And experiment a little bit. If mandates work in B1, 2, and 3, then think about expanding it if you want to. But I think that you may find this backfires, that developers, instead of saying, oh, this is much better than 830G, thank you very much, they may say, well, you've now made it impossible for us to build anything because of these inclusionary requirements. And I don't think that's what you intend. That would be unintended consequences. So I would really, and I hope you do have another public hearing, because I'd like to have a discussion with you face-to-face rather than on Zoom. And I'm not back in town on the 3rd. So I hope you do continue this at least to the 17th. And that you give this, you know, you started the presentation at your last meeting saying this was a no-brainer. This is not a no-brainer. This is very serious, and you ought to really think about it very, very carefully. And if the only reason you're doing this is because of something that Mr. Katz has described as a bugaboo, which is 830G, then you may be doing the wrong thing for a bad reason. And I'll leave it at that so Mr. Katz can maybe go to bed soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Any further conversation or questions from Mr. Carr before we let him go?
Mr. Katz usually wants to ask me a question
I
after
know,
the
that's
public hearing is
what I was
closed.
Not
Here's your
appropriate.
chance.
It's not appropriate. What's appropriate is to move this forward. We're spending a lot of time here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Carr. I'm sure we'll see you in January.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now let's who's next, Mr. Larson.
Yes, he should be there in just a second. There he is.
Just one fact-based clarification that Mr. Carr mentioned. Darien's regulation, by the way, my opinion, I don't think it is matters whether or not Darien and Ridgefield are relevant. I think most of our discussion was about what feels right for Ridgefield. It just so happens that what feels right for Ridgefield happened to reflect well in language that was in comparing to bunch of others, but just for the record on facts, Darien's regulation is not an overlay zone. It applies to, I'll quote, all zones that allow dwelling units as a principal or special permit use. Mr. Larson.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. First, thanks to the committee for volunteering to work on planning and zoning. I've actually chaired a Ridgefield committee in the past, and know when I was chairing it, I worked on it 7 days a week. So I understand, the time commitment you're all making on this. I understand the two broad prongs of this proposal, multi-unit versus single unit. I had 2 or 3 comments on that, some of which I outlined in my email. First is, as has been mentioned before, it does seem to be that it would apply any place in Ridgefield. And at least to my understanding, one of the better practices of affordable housing is to locate it near areas with good transportation. So the notion that we could apply this anywhere in Ridgefield doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. So to me, I would like to see the amendment modified to be specific as to where and how that could be applied. Second issue is multi-unit versus single unit developments. I understand how it works in multifamily. We've seen that work in Ridgefield before. It can be a significant number of units. Some of them are affordable. They're all the same. Nobody cares, and it all works just fine. On the other hand, I struggle to see how that's going to work in a small single unit development. So what's a developer to do? He's going to build 6 houses. A couple of them have to be affordable. So what does he do? Does he make them all smaller houses, more intense density, so that he can do that? Or does he plan to build what they normally plan to do, which is very expensive houses, and have to figure out what to do with the 1 or 2 that he has to make affordable? It just doesn't seem to be workable. I understand the multifamily thing. It can work, has worked. I really don't see how the single unit idea works, and I would strike that if I had my wishes. Third point is, there's a lot of discussion about discretionary ability of planning and zoning to decide to approve or not approve, especially as related to the single unit housing development. It seems like the planning and zoning could do this, could do that, could not do this, could not do that. I don't see how that helps a developer decide what to do. And I think there should be clarity, a lot more clarity on what those criteria would be if you really want to pursue that piece. So to me, I would be fine if we just left it at 830G and did not pursue this amendment. If we do pursue it, I would like to see it limited to multifamily units and have specificity as to where it would and will not apply in Ridgefield. So in closing, thanks again for your work. I know how much work it takes. Annoying to get input from people that are only partially involved, but I hope you give this another round of consideration. Take out the single unit, specify where the multifamily units issues would be specified. And if you don't want to do either of those two, just don't do it. 830G might be enough. Thanks a lot, and good luck.
Thank you. Any questions or conversation from Mr. Larson? Mr. Larson, I really appreciate it. I mean, you really focused on the couple issues that frankly we also focused on and kind of had some debate, and this is what we wanted to hear from people, so that we weren't doing this in a bubble. So it's good to hear this feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Um,
Let's see. We have Mr. Carr's hand is up. I don't know if it was still up or if he put it up again, so I'll just
I will check.
promote him again.
Yes, thank
you-
you. I just want to make one more point. That is, I understand this is not because we are like Darien, but I think the points that Mr. Larson made were extremely good points. Ridgefield has 35 square miles, has a density of just over 700 people per square mile. Darien has is only 12 square miles. It has a density of 1,700 square miles. One of the biggest places that they're building under this inclusionary zoning regulation is at the Norotan Heights train station. That should tell you something. One of the things you might want to consider is something transit oriented. My fear is that if you did transit oriented development and you made it attractive, you'd get a lot more of it than if you mandated this inclusionary housing component. And if you really are trying to do what Ridgefield needs, you would probably stop concentrating on the things we don't need and trying to get the things we do need. And 830G sends you down the wrong path. Just my humble opinion.
Mr. Carr, let me just ask to make sure I clarify, make sure I understand what you're advocating there. Are you saying that you would be supportive or pro the idea of an inclusionary zoning regulation where we actually provided an incentive on specific zones or areas that were transit oriented? So for example, would you like to see us write a IZ regulation that said, okay, a developer could have a significant density bonus if they built in Branchville, as an example, because Branchville is a transit center? Is that something that you would actually be really supportive of?
As long as it was an incentive and not a mandate, I think that would be, the thing about the mandate is it could backfire. And instead of building more of what you need, you end up building nothing because the inclusionary is a deal killer.
Okay.
Thank you.
You would be excited or supportive of the idea of increased density, et cetera, different types of bonuses and incentives to actually stimulate larger, more intensive development, as long as it was in certain areas.
In a transit-oriented zone, that seems to me to be a rational kind of thing to do. The biggest problem is if you mandate it, and then that becomes a deal killer for building market rate units that might be naturally occurring affordable. But a lot of developers don't want to have to limit themselves to low income restricted units where they have all that documentation every year to prove that these people are certified to live. I mean, it's a real nightmare. I mean, I've never been in that business. I think Mr. Tartaglia has, and he can tell you, but I can't even imagine. I mean, I hear the people at who are on the housing authority, they refer to it annually as the bend over. I mean, this is not a great thing for people to participate in. Much better if people could have affordable places to live, that they don't have to prove that they have low incomes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carr.
It looks like Mr. Larson has his hand up again. Let me see.
Well, actually, I lowered it, so I'm good to go.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure.
All right, thank you. I do not see anyone else.
All right. No other hands up. I think, I'll open it up to commission conversation again, but I think just to summarize, we had, I think it was 6, Mr. Carr twice, so 5 speakers tonight. We've had plenty of letters, and I think we've had pretty resounding feedback, which we already agreed with, was to keep this conversation going. I think the main question, which I'd love for commissioners to give thoughts on our, do we keep this for January 3rd on the regular agenda? Or, are commissioners inclined to do a special meeting on a different date? I think those are the kind of the two options for immediate next step. That's number one. And then I guess number two, just to confirm, Alice and I will follow up with the Affordable Housing Committee. Dave Goldenberg, and as I said, Ms. Lardem-Zola, I know, is hoping to make it tonight. So I think that they should speak, and Board of Finance and or Treasurer, by the way, is something I thought about also in the last week or two. I just didn't get to take action on it, but try to circle back with them.
Rob, I also reached out to WPCA.
Great, thank you.
And then also maybe actual feedback from Board of Selectmen. I know they asked us to continue it, but providing real
Substantive.
feedback, some thoughts.
Right.
And maybe Affordable Housing has, or Board of Selectmen have thoughts on the transit focus as well, and the WPCA.
So we will definitely follow up with those three key groups before the next meeting. Now, what do you think, folks? Do we want to continue this to January 3rd and at least allow some discussion, even, and it will probably might continue beyond that as well? Or do we want to set up a special meeting that's, kind
We
of,
don't have any time. We can continue this as long as we need to because it's our thing. I'd prefer to just keep it during the regular meeting.
Let me counter that, if I may, not in its entirety, but as a thought piece. If we do that, we're demanding of the public that they fracture their time as well. Whereas if we concentrate this in a one public hearing, maybe even two, but certainly one, where the public could be timed, maybe not 3 flexible minutes, but 5 absolute minutes, where at the end of 5 minutes, they are cut off, even if they're in the middle of the word "and." It's the only way to do this. We cannot do it the way we did it tonight. It's too long-winded, and it does not encourage people to shorten and abbreviate their very good points, which we are interested in hearing. So I think we need to devote an evening to this willingly and excitedly, and invite the public to share their views with us on that evening alone.
not a bad point, to focus, to allow, to set a date that people know that they can show up, so they don't have to sit through a lot of other discussion.
Rob, also, I might have missed this because I stepped away for 30 seconds, but did we also include having someone from another town that's been doing this for a while report back, or getting some report that we can read back, just to get some sort of input on that?
We can, I guess, we talked about it, but we didn't really get to a point where, I guess my question for you all would be, who are you interested in hearing from? Because we've talked, Alice and myself have separately talked to a lot of different people. I'm not sure.
Well, I just feel like along with affordable housing and, the finance or whoever, that having someone who's been doing this for a while to just report back on how it works would be sort of part of the interesting feedback that would add all to the whole conversation. Maybe we have one night of just reporting back and then a public conversation.
Yeah, so maybe have that right before public on the same one night.
Rob, another hand has gone up.
Ms. McGuire.
Yeah.
Since we're still early in the public hearing portion.
Should I invite her in?
Please.
Hi, thank you. I totally concur with Mr. Katz. There should be a public forum, a meeting dedicated to this topic. I think it would be obviously helpful to the public, but also to you, so that we're focusing on one thing and people are prepared to come. And I totally agree with Mr. Katz. You have a timer and you cut people right off. It works. That's the only way to run a really efficient meeting.
Okay.
But thank you.
Red and green light.
I'll be happy to be your timer. I'm doing that.
Be careful. I'll call you on that.
I could be the bad guy.
Okay.
But definitely the 17th. The 3rd is just right around the corner. People are hardly getting back.
Yeah.
So thank you for taking that input.
Thank you. All right. what do you think, folks? Is there any objection to setting a special meeting, potentially for, say, January 10th or maybe January, 18th or something around that zone? I don't know if people want to look at calendars. Alice, I don't know if we have notice requirements. We probably have to think about that, right?
Why don't the office work that out and do it at the most convenient meeting that is next up on their calendar? And we don't want to crowd off any agendized item, but we got to get to this and get to it in an orderly fashion.
Alice, do you have a date?
I'm gonna have to figure it out. But 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after. The public notice has to be 15 days before, so it's basically a month.
You gotta,
The 17th, I'm sorry.
Alice, you have to speak toward your laptop.
Probably the soonest would be about the 25th of January for a special meeting. A month is about the time needed to do the 2 notices.
Okay.
You want me to send you a few dates? And we
Yeah,
can.
why don't we do that, and then we can kind of confirm it on the 3rd, but so we will continue this public hearing at a special meeting, a date to be determined by the office.
Okay, so it will not be discussed January 3rd then?
That's what.
Okay.
Unless somebody wants to jump in and object, I think that's what the consensus here is.
Okay, I'll check. We'll try for Wednesday, the 18th or the 25th. Okay.
All right. Okay, is there any further discussion on this before we continue the public hearing to a date in January to be determined by the staff and will be properly noticed? All right, and further discussion, the public hearing will be continued. All right, next item up.
Kurt Carr on the record.